I never imagined that at 72 years old, I'd be sitting here, opening my heart to tell you something that changed me forever. My name is Gracielita Martinez. And even though I smile today, there was a time when I thought I'd never smile again. I was 45 when my marriage to Ramiro, a man I once swore I'd love forever, began to crumble. It didn't happen overnight. It was years of shouting matches, cold silences, and promises that never made it past our lips. But I stayed, clinging to the illusion of a family, of a future that had long since slipped through our fingers. The last day we spent together, Ramiro came home smelling like cheap perfume and wearing a smile that didn't belong to me. I didn't need to ask a single question. My heart knew before my mind could catch up. He looked at me, almost with disgust, and said, "You and I have nothing left, Gracielita. Whatever we had ended a long time ago." I didn't cry in front of him. I refused to give him that power. I waited until he walked out the door. And the moment it closed behind him, it felt like my soul shattered into 1,000 pieces. But the worst part? That night, as I curled into myself in that cold, empty bed, I thought that was the deepest pain I'd ever feel. How naive I was. The weeks that followed were a blur. There were days I couldn't even get out of bed. Friends, those few I had left, would call, trying to drag me out of the house. "Let's go have some coffee, Gracielita. Just to get some air." But I didn't have the strength. Not to talk. Not to smile. Not even to answer the phone. I felt like a ghost in my own home, wandering between broken memories and framed photographs that now felt like they were mocking me. My mother, Donna Lupita, was one of those women who seemed unbreakable. Strong. Unshakable. Always with her hair neatly tied and her back straight. She came every single day, bringing me hot soup, sweetbread, and a kind of love that didn't need words. Sometimes she'd sit beside me on the couch and gently run her fingers through my hair, like she used to when I was a little girl. She didn't say much, but her silence was louder than anything anyone else could have told me. One afternoon, as she helped me pack Ramiro's things into boxes, his shirt still smelling like that awful cologne, she whispered softly, "Mija, life goes on. You can't stay stuck here forever. You're strong, Gracielita. You always have been." I nodded, even though inside, I didn't feel strong at all. But she was right. I had to get up. I had to find a new purpose. A new reason to smile. Little by little, I started to rebuild myself. I got a small job at the neighborhood corner store, helping Donna Marie with the customers. It wasn't much money, but it gave me a reason to get dressed each day. I'd put on a bit of red lipstick, just enough to feel alive again, and I started going out more often. Bit by bit, the world didn't feel so heavy, but that's when the whispers started. First, it was the strange looks from the neighbors. Then the not-so-subtle comments that floated through the air like little daggers. "Did you hear what Ramiro did? Que de caro. And she looked like such a saint, poor thing." I didn't understand what they meant at first. I figured Ramiro had moved on, found another woman. Didn't surprise me in the slightest, but I told myself it didn't matter. He was the past. Or so I wanted to believe, until one day, while I was stacking cans on the store shelf, Donna Carmen, the biggest gossip in the whole barrio, walked up to me with that fake sympathetic voice of hers and dropped the bomb. Gracielita, I don't even know how to say this, but I saw your mom and Ramiro together, all hugged up in the plaza." I laughed, nervously, disbelieving. That couldn't be right. My mother? My mother, she must have been mistaken. Maybe it was someone else. But then Donna Carmen made that face, that "I know what I saw" face, and like she was twisting the knife with a smile, she added, "They were kissing, Mija. Kissing. In the middle of the street." I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet. The can slipped from my hands and clattered across the floor. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might faint right there in the aisle. I ran home, breathless, dizzy, desperate to believe it was all just some ugly misunderstanding. There had to be another explanation. My mother would never do something like that to me, right? but when I got home, I found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup like the world hadn't just fallen apart. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "Is it true? Are you seeing Ramiro?" She turned around slowly, wooden spoon still in hand. That face, the one that had once comforted me, suddenly looked like a stranger's. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just lowered her gaze, and in that silence, I knew that I felt something tear inside me. Like a clean rip down the center of my chest. It was betrayal, twice over. From the man I once loved. And the woman who gave me life. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know what to do. I grabbed my purse and ran out of the house, tears blurring my vision, rage burning like fire under my skin. Night fell over me like a heavy blanket. I sat on a random sidewalk, knees pulled to my chest like a child, wondering when exactly my life had slipped out of my hands. What I didn't know then was that, despite the heartbreak, that night would mark the beginning of my true rebirth. That night, I wandered aimlessly through the cobblestone streets of our old neighborhood. The worn-out street lamps barely lit the way, and the cold wind whispered every painful truth my heart had been trying to ignore. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging the weight of every betrayal behind me. Eventually, I found myself at the town plaza, the same one where, according to Dona Carmen, my mother and Ramiro had been seen. I looked around. The benches, the flower stands, the elote vendor. Everything looked exactly the same, but for me, nothing would ever be the same again. My thoughts spiraled, memories of Sundays spent as a family, my mother's hugs as I cried over Ramiro's indifference. And now, she was part of the wound. Time passed. The cold seeped into my bones. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to face this new reality that had been handed to me without permission. That's when my phone rang. It was Elena, my best friend since childhood. One of those people God puts in your life so you don't completely fall apart when the storm hits. I answered with a broken voice. "Where are you, Gracielita? We've been worried sick." I whispered the name of the plaza where I sat, and not even 20 minutes later, her old beat-up car pulled up, headlights flickering like they felt my sorrow too. She jumped out, ran to me, and wrapped me in a hug so tight I felt the first breath of relief I'd had in weeks. "Come to my house, Chula," she said, brushing the hair from my face. "You don't have to go through this alone." That night, I slept on a thin mattress on Elena's living room floor, wrapped in colorful blankets and the quiet love of a friend who didn't need to understand everything to be there. Days passed. Then weeks. I didn't go back home. I didn't answer calls. I didn't open messages. My mother tried to reach me. She kept insisting we talk. But I couldn't. Every attempt felt like someone rubbing salt into a wound that refused to close. Elena took care of me like I was her little sister. She made me coffee in the mornings. She dragged me to the market just so I'd get some sun on my skin. And when I looked especially hollow, she'd blast rancheras through the old stereo and pull me into an awkward dance until I let out a shy, unintentional laugh. It was on one of those mornings, coffee in hand, both of us staring out the window in silence, when she asked me, "What are you going to do, Gracielita? You can't stay like this forever." I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to cut all ties with my mother, erase her from my life the way she had erased me from hers, but another part of me, that part remembered the woman who taught me how to braid my hair, the one who bandaged scraped knees, the one who silently cried whenever she saw me in pain. Resentment was a poison, and I could feel it eating me alive. One afternoon, I walked to the small church in the neighborhood. I'm not the most religious person, never really was, but I needed a place where I could let my soul spill out without anyone judging me. I sat in one of the pews, staring at the altar glowing under the soft light of flickering candles. I closed my eyes. And in that silence, I spoke to God. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move forward. It hurts so much, Lord. More than I thought I could ever bear. But I don't want to live bitter. I don't want to be a shadow of who I used to be. And there, I cried. I cried like a little girl, pouring out everything I'd been holding in for far too long. It wasn't some magical revelation. No voice came down from the heavens. But in the middle of all that sobbing, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A tiny flicker of peace, not a cure. Not a solution. Just a seed. A seed of understanding. If I wanted to heal, I had to let go, not for them. Not because they deserved it. But for me. That night, I went back to Elena's house with a quiet determination settling inside me, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I finally understood that if I kept feeding my anger, I would never be free. The next morning, I picked up my phone. My hand trembled with every number I dialed, like each button pressed was a step toward a cliff I didn't want to jump from. She answered almost instantly. Her voice cracked on the other end. Gracielita, Hajita. I swallowed hard. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want drama. I didn't even want an explanation. I want to see you, I said simply. But not at home. Somewhere neutral. There was a long pause. As if she were holding her breath on the other side. Of course, Mija. Anywhere you want. I suggested the little cafe on the corner, the one I used to love as a girl, where I'd eat sweetbread and dream about a life that hadn't yet broken me. I figured maybe, just maybe, in a place full of good memories, the bad ones wouldn't feel so heavy. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind played out every possible scenario. Tears. Screams. Walkouts. I didn't know what would happen. I just knew this meeting would change something, for better or worse. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, sitting at a small table in the back, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of hot chocolate, as if the warmth could give her the strength her body didn't have. I walked toward her slowly. Each step felt like a battle between love and pain. She looked up, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Guilt. A guilt so raw, so heavy, it cracked something inside me, and yet, it opened a tiny window in the locked door of my heart. I sat down across from her. We didn't speak at first. The cafe smelled like fresh-baked bread and cinnamon. But between us, the air was thick. Like grief. Like fear. Like everything we didn't know how to say. My hands trembled on the table. I didn't know if I wanted to hug her, or scream. She broke the silence first. I don't even know where to begin, Hija. I stared at her. Her hands, once so firm, now shook slightly. Her eyes, once so full of fire, looked dim, tired, but she was still my mother. And that truth was tearing me in half. Start with the truth, Mom. My voice quivered. How could you? Why? She looked down at the table, as if the wood grain was easier to face than my eyes. It wasn't planned, Gracielita, she whispered. I felt so alone. You didn't need me like you used to. Your father had already passed, and Ramiro, he reached out. Her words hit me like sharp, slow knives. I wanted to interrupt. To tell her that loneliness doesn't justify betrayal. But something in me told me to stay quiet. To just listen. At first, it was innocent. Friendly, she continued, nervously. Folding and unfolding a napkin. Just conversations. Coffee. I thought I was helping him, helping you both move on. Then she paused, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. But slowly, he started to fill empty spaces I didn't even know were there. I covered my mouth with my hand, holding in a scream that was clawing its way up my throat. How could she talk about voids, when she had left a canyon in me? Tears began to slide down her face, silently, as if she knew no words could ever justify what she'd done. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, or even tomorrow, she said, her voice trembling. I just need you to know, what happened doesn't erase how much I love you. It doesn't erase all we've been. I closed my eyes. Inside, a storm was raging, rage, grief, heartbreak, love, all tangled together. And do you think that's enough, Mom? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. To say you love me, after everything? She shook her head, crying quietly. No. But if one day you can give me a chance, I'll be here. Always. We sat there, Two broken women, trying to make sense of a love that had been shattered, but hadn't completely disappeared. That we didn't hug. We didn't make promises. We didn't pretend anything had been fixed, but in the silence that followed, we looked at each other, and in that long, aching gaze, was everything we couldn't say with words. I left the cafe feeling like I'd carried a boulder up a mountain, only to realize the real climb was just beginning. Days passed. Then weeks, each morning felt like a war with my own resentment. There were moments I wanted to call her, tell her how I was feeling, reach for the comfort I'd always found in her voice, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready. Sometimes I'd see her from a distance, in the market, or crossing the plaza, always alone, always with her eyes cast down, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to name. So I buried myself in my work at Donna Mari's little store. I became the person everyone came to with their stories. Heartbreaks, gossip, laughter, they all found their way to me, and strangely, listening to others helped me start to rebuild myself piece by piece. I was learning how to live with the pain, without letting it define me. I began to find tiny pockets of joy in the most unexpected places. Don Chewy's cheerful "Buenos dias." The kids playing marbles outside the shop. The sunset painting the sky orange over the rooftops. Somehow I was still standing. One afternoon, while I was organizing cans of pickled chilies on the store shelf, Elena burst through the door with that mischievous smile she always wore when she had something up her sleeve. "Guess what, Gracielita," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "They're starting crochet classes at the community center. They say crocheting heals the soul. You in?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in a long time, the idea of learning something new didn't feel impossible. Maybe, just maybe, between colorful yarns and clumsy stitches, I could start stitching my heart back together. "Let's go," I told her, wiping my hands on my apron, and just like that, without overthinking it, I stepped into a new chapter, one that wasn't built around pain, or loss, or betrayal. One that slowly, gently, began to revolve around me. Every class was a challenge. My fingers fumbled more than they flowed. The yarn twisted itself into messy knots, but each mistake made me laugh. And every little success brought back a flicker of pride I hadn't felt in years. Then one afternoon, as I struggled to learn a new stitch, I felt a familiar presence standing in the doorway. I turned, and there she was, my mother, Donna Lupita, holding a soft skein of sky blue yarn between her weathered hands. Her eyes trembled with emotion. She didn't say a word, she just stepped forward, cautiously, like someone who knows they could be turned away at any moment. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready to keep living with a frozen soul either. So I gave her a small nod, motioning to the empty seat beside me. She sat down, quietly, without words, without demands, just a mother beside her daughter, trying. The crochet needles trembled in my fingers as I tried to keep working, and I could feel her watching me, hesitant, nervous. She picked up her own pair, awkward in her grip, her hands more used to kneading dough and pulling weeds than delicate stitches. That we didn't speak. Not at first, only the soft rustling of yarn and the occasional sigh filled the space between us. It was a fragile piece, like a soap bubble you're afraid to breathe near, but I kept stitching. Not just with my hands, but with everything inside me. Each loop, each knot, was a thread in the mending of something broken and sacred. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched her struggle, her brow furrowed, tongue peeking out slightly in concentration. Breathing shallow with nerves, she wasn't the unshakable woman I had always known. She was human. Flawed. And slowly, part of me began to see that again. After a few minutes, she set her needles down with a defeated sigh. "I don't think this is for me, Mija," she said, her voice lined with sadness. I put down my yarn and looked at her. We sat, face to face, two women, two lifetimes tangled together. "You don't have to be good at it," I said softly. "You just have to try." She looked down, and in that quiet moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame, not the kind that comes from tangled yarn and clumsy hands, but the deep, soul-crushing kind, the shame of someone who knows they've hurt the person they love most. Weeks passed, and she kept coming back. Every Wednesday, we sat side by side at the community center. She never brought up the past. Never pushed. She was just there, sharing the silence. Sipping café de olla after class. smiling faintly when our yarns knotted themselves into chaos, and little by little, without realizing it, we began to build something new, not what we'd lost. That was gone, but something else. Something more fragile. More honest. More real. One afternoon, after class, we walked to the plaza together. We sat beneath an old tree that had probably outlived generations of heartbreaks and reconciliations. Then, from her bag, she pulled out a small package, wrapped in simple paper and tied with a bit of string. "I made you something," she said, her voice shaking. I hesitated, then carefully opened it. It was a scarf, sky blue, like the yarn from that first day. The stitches were uneven, full of tiny mistakes. But it was soft. Warm. Beautiful in its imperfection. I pressed it to my face and closed my eyes. It smelled like her, like home. Like something I thought I had lost forever. "It's not perfect," she murmured. "It doesn't have to be," I whispered back, as a single tear escaped down my cheek. We sat there, wrapped in that fragile, quiet moment. No forgiveness spoken. No past erased, just a beginning. Life, however, isn't always kind with its timing. Just when I started to believe I might truly heal, he came back. Ramiro. It was an ordinary morning. I was restocking canned goods at Don Amari's shop when I heard the bell over the door. I looked up, and there he was, standing in the entrance like a ghost from a past I'd buried. Same old leather jacket. Same smirk. And that scent of stale arrogance that used to twist my stomach into knots. For a second, time froze. I considered hurling a can of jalapenos at his head instead. I took a deep breath. I'd worked too hard, cried too many tears, to let him drag me back into that pit. He walked up to the counter, fidgeting with his keys like a nervous teenager. "How've you been, Gracielita?" he asked, as if we didn't have a mountain of pain between us. I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time, I didn't feel love. Or sadness. Or even hate. I felt nothing, and that nothing was the greatest freedom I'd ever known. "What do you want, Ramiro?" My voice was calm. Cold. Steady. He shrugged, eyes darting to the floor. "Your mom and we're not together anymore." I almost laughed. I didn't know whether to feel pity or disgust, but I said nothing, just waited. He took a deep breath, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he wanted to sound sincere, the same tone he once used to lie to my face without flinching. "I made a mistake. I never should have hurt you. If I could go back," I raised my hand to stop him. "I don't need your apologies, Ramiro," I said, each word sharp and certain. "Not anymore." He blinked, caught off guard, like he expected to find the same broken woman he left behind, but that woman, she no longer lived in me. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I added. "But not here. Not with me." His shoulders dropped. He looked smaller somehow. Deflated. Defeated, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. I watched him go. And I felt it, a weight lifting. A chain breaking. A wound finally closing. That night, Elena and I didn't celebrate with tequila or music. We celebrated with sweetbread and hot chocolate. With laughter. With quiet relief. "You're stronger than you think, Gracielita," she told me, pulling me into a warm, tight hug, and for the first time in years, I believed her. Wrapped in the sky blue scarf my mother had made, I curled up on the couch and exhaled. The pain hadn't vanished. But the power it held over me, that was gone. After that day, the day I closed the door on Ramiro for good, something inside me finally settled. I won't lie to you. There were still days when the memories stung. When a song, or a street corner, or even the faint smell of cheap cologne would pull me backward, but now, those memories didn't crush me. They passed through like a distant train, loud, maybe, but far away. My mother and I kept going to the crochet classes. Sometimes we chatted about simple things, recipes, gossip from the market, the unbearable summer heat. Other times, we sat in silence. But it wasn't the cold silence we once shared. It was something softer. Gentler. The kind of silence that grows between two people who've hurt each other, but still choose to stay. One afternoon, as we crocheted on Elena's porch, my mother turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in A long time, serious. Almost scared. Mija, there's something else I need to tell you. I set my yarn aside, bracing myself. After everything we'd been through, I couldn't imagine there was anything left that could shock me. She took a deep breath. The kind you take when you're about to tear open a scar. Ramiro wasn't the first, she said quietly. My fingers tightened on my lap till I stared at her, not quite understanding. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at me, her eyes were fixed on the yarn in her hands, twisting it slowly, as if trying to unravel her past knot by knot. When you were little, there was another man, she said. Someone I loved. In silence while I was still married to your father. It never turned physical, but in my heart. I had already betrayed him. I didn't say a word. My mind tried to wrap itself around this new version of the woman I thought I knew. My mother. The strong one. The loyal one. The one who always put family first. She kept speaking, her voice trembling. I'm not telling you this to excuse anything, Gracielita. I just need you to know. I've been a woman full of emptiness for much longer. Then I realized. And I made terrible mistakes. With your father. With you. With myself. I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the mother who raised me. I saw the woman beneath all of that, a woman who had been aching, lonely, flawed, trying. We sat in silence for a long time. The sun was dipping behind the rooftops, casting the porch in a soft, golden hue. Finally, I spoke. Thank you for telling me, Mom. It takes a lot of courage to admit something like that. She cried quietly, like someone who's been carrying the weight of guilt for decades, and in a moment I didn't plan, didn't expect. I reached for her hand, not out of duty. Not out of pity, but because I saw her pain. And I understood it. I didn't forgive everything that day. The scars were still there. Some would probably never fade, but love, sometimes love is just staying. Even when it hurts. Even when it's complicated. Even when you no longer know exactly what love is supposed to look like. From that point on, my life began to shift again, this time, in a new direction. I signed up for traditional Mexican cooking classes at the community center. Not because I wanted to open a restaurant or prove anything, but because I needed something that reminded me of who I was, who I could still become. That's where I met Don Matias, a 65-year-old widower with silver hair, kind eyes, and a joke for every occasion. The kind of man who speaks slowly, listens closely, and laughs with his whole chest. At first, I didn't trust him. Not completely. After what I'd been through, trusting a man again felt like asking a wounded bird to fly, but Matias never pushed. Never asked questions that hurt. He just showed up with coffee. With stories. With kindness that didn't ask for anything in return. Sometimes, after class, he'd walk me home with a small bag of ingredients in one hand and a quiet smile on his face. Other times, he'd leave me little notes tucked inside recipe books. The secret ingredient is laughter. You don't need to be perfect, just present. He never flirted. Never crossed a line. He was just gentle, a soft place to land in a world that had been too sharp for too long. One afternoon, as we walked toward the church after class, he shared something I'll never forget. I lost my wife 10 years ago, he said, eyes fixed on the cobblestones beneath us. I loved her with everything I had. When she died, I thought I had died too. But over time, I learned something. You don't stop living because someone leaves. You carry them with you, quietly, and you keep going. His words settled into my chest like a warm stone, because maybe that's what I was doing too, learning to carry my grief. Learning to keep going. Months passed. My relationship with my mother kept healing, not perfectly, not without tension. But with more honesty. More tenderness, and with Matias, well, things stayed simple. That we weren't lovers. We weren't even officially anything. But we were two tired souls who had learned to laugh together, to listen, to just be, and that, in its own quiet way, was enough. One evening, as we sat on a plaza bench eating tamales wrapped in banana leaves, Matias looked at me with a tenderness that caught me off guard. Gracielita, he said softly, I don't know if you'll ever want to love again. And if you don't, that's okay. But I just want you to know. I'm here. Not to take anything from you. Not to erase your past. Just to walk beside you, if you'll let me. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't answer with words, I just smiled, a quiet, fragile smile, and he understood, because sometimes, the best answers don't come with speeches. They come in silence. In presence. In a shared tamal under the stars, and so, a new chapter began. Not with fireworks. Not with grand romance, but with slow, intentional steps. With shared mornings and gentle conversations. With no expectations, just two people finding comfort in each other's existence. I realized then that love doesn't always arrive in a whirlwind. Sometimes, it's a sky blue scarf. A hot cup of café de Alia. A walk through the market on a quiet Sunday morning. It's in the stillness. The softness. The safety, and maybe, just maybe, I was learning to love again, not just someone else, but myself. The months passed like pages in a quiet book, some fast, some slow, each one bringing a little more healing. The version of me that once cried in silence, that walked aimlessly through streets with a broken heart, was slowly fading into the background, not forgotten, but no longer in control. The my relationship with my mother became something new. Not perfect. Not like before, but real. We stopped pretending. We stopped performing. We spoke like two women, not just mother and daughter. I learned how to set boundaries without feeling guilty. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still protect yourself from their hurt. That was, perhaps, the hardest lesson of all. One day, while we were crocheting together at the park, my mom shared something I never expected to hear. Did you know I used to dream of traveling when I was young? She asked, her fingers gently twisting the yarn between them. I looked at her, surprised. I had never imagined her dreaming beyond the kitchen, beyond the neighborhood. What happened? I asked. She gave me a sad little smile. I fell in love. Got married. And figured dreams were for people who didn't have mouths to feed. Her words hit me right in the chest. So many of us women were taught to put ourselves last. To sacrifice our desires for everyone else's comfort, and in that moment, I saw her not just as my mother, but as a woman who had lost parts of herself along the way, just like me. That night, as I sat alone in my little room, eating leftover tamales and sipping cinnamon tea, I kept thinking about her words. When was the last time I let myself dream? When was the last time I imagined a future with me at the center, not as someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's fixer, but just me? I didn't have the answer. But I knew one thing, it was time. So I grabbed a pen and an old notebook, and for the first time in decades, I started a list, not a to-do list. Not a grocery list, not a dream list, things I wanted to do before I died, not to impress anyone. Not for photos on the wall. Just for me, simple. Things. I learned to dance salsa, even if I was terrible. Feel the ocean on my feet. Read an entire book without feeling guilty for wasting time. Ride a bicycle again, even if I fell. That I laughed while riding, picturing myself wobbling on a bike, hair wild, smiling like a fool, and it wasn't a sad laugh. It was full of life, the first dream I chose to chase. Salsa. I signed up for a free Saturday class in the town plaza. And when the day came, I was shaking. I didn't know anyone. My body felt stiff, awkward, like my legs didn't belong to me. Then, right on cue, Elena showed up grinning from ear to ear. Don Matthias heard about your big debut, she teased. He said he's coming too. And sure enough, there he was, standing at the edge of the plaza, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and that calm, steady smile of his. I don't know how to dance either, Matthias said, chuckling. But if we're going to make fools of ourselves, let's do it together. And we did that. We danced like two broken spinning tops, out of rhythm, stepping on each other, laughing through every mistake, every wrong turn, every missed beat. Felt like a little victory. That we weren't dancing well, but we were dancing free. After class, we sat on the plaza steps, passing a bottle of water between us and catching our breath under the soft light of dusk. You know something, Gracielita, he said, looking out at the street. Life's a lot like salsa. Sometimes you get stepped on, sometimes you lose the beat, but as long as you keep moving, you're still in the dance. I laughed so hard I started to cry. But they weren't the old tears, not from grief or betrayal, they were tears of release. Tears of relief, because I was still here. I had survived. And now. I was dancing later that week, while tidying up Elena's house. I noticed a flyer taped to the lamppost outside, group trip to Veracruz, sea, sun, and smiles. My heart jumped to the ocean, the dream I'd written on the very top of my list. I tore the flyer down and pressed it to my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like something big, something just for me, was finally possible. That night, I stood in front of the little mirror in my room. I held the flyer in one hand and looked myself in the eyes. "You deserve this, Gracielita," I whispered. It felt strange at first, speaking kindly to myself. Giving myself permission to want something. To chase it. Without guilt. Without apology. The trip wasn't expensive. With what I earned at the shop and a few pesos I'd quietly saved, I could make it happen. So I signed up. When I told my mother, she paused for a moment, then pulled me into a hug. "It's never too late to chase your dreams, Hija," she whispered into my hair, and in her voice, I didn't hear sorrow or regret. I heard pride. The morning of the trip, the sun rose bright and golden, as if the sky itself was cheering me on. I boarded the bus with a small backpack, a borrowed sun hat from Elena, and a heart pounding like a drum. The view out the window was a ribbon of green hills, dusty roads, and shimmering rivers. The kind of scenery that makes you realize how big the world is, and how small your pain becomes when you let yourself breathe again. And then, finally, the sea of vast. Endless. Blue like a dream. I stepped off that bus and ran, barefoot, across the sand. Didn't care about my clothes. Didn't care who was watching. The ocean kissed my feet. The wind wrapped around me like a blessing, and in that moment, with my arms stretched wide and my heart wide open, I let the world hold me. I closed my eyes and let the waves touch my skin. Not just my body, my soul. The breeze didn't ask where I came from. It didn't care how many times I'd been betrayed. It didn't measure my worth in heartbreak or mistakes. It just welcomed me. The sea didn't need explanations. It simply was. And standing there, soaked and barefoot with tears blending into the salt of the air, I simply was, too. I cried, but this time, not from sadness. I cried for the woman I used to be. The one who stayed silent to keep others comfortable. The one who believed her value came from being needed. And then, like the tide pulling away from the shore, I felt something let go inside me, a weight I'd carried for too long. A pain I'd mistaken for identity. I laid on the warm sand, letting it cling to my skin like a blanket from the earth, and there, with the sky burning orange above me and the waves whispering promises at my feet, I made peace with myself. That I was no longer waiting to be saved. I was no longer trying to prove my worth to anyone. I was here, whole, wounded, healing, and finally free. I came back from Veracruz with sun-kissed skin and a smile I hadn't seen on my own face in years. The neighbors noticed it first. "What did they give you at the beach, Gracielita?" Dona Mari joked, handing me a warm cup of cafe. "Da Alia. You're glowing." I just laughed and shrugged, holding the feeling close like a secret I wasn't ready to share, because it was mine. A quiet treasure I'd found in the waves. Even my mother noticed the change. When I stopped by to visit, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Your eyes, Hija, they look alive again," she whispered, brushing my hair like she used to when I was a child, and for the first time in forever, I let her. I trusted that gesture. I let it in without flinching. The days that followed were slow and sweet. Like a toll on a rainy morning, Matthias and I kept spending time together, still without labels, still without pressure. One warm afternoon, as we sat eating nieve de garrafa in the plaza, he looked at me and said, "You know what I've learned, Gracielita?" I asked, licking my mango-flavored spoon. "That it's never too late to start again." I smiled. Because I had learned that too. It didn't matter how many wrinkles I had, how many scars my heart carried, how many pieces I'd had to gather. As long as I was breathing, there was still time to build something beautiful. That same afternoon, As Matthias and I laughed like teenagers over melted ice cream, he gently reached for my hand, not in a dramatic way. Not like a movie scene, just soft. Real. Would you like to keep walking with me, Gracielita? He asked, voice low, eyes steady. No promises of fairy tales. No pretending to fix what we've both lived through. Just a hand to hold, and a place to rest when you're tired. My chest filled with warmth so deep, I thought it might spill from my eyes. I didn't answer with words, I just closed my fingers around his, and in that simple gesture, I said yes. We kept building something, slowly, like everything that lasts. We'd go to the market on Sundays, buying fresh fruit and laughing over the price of limes. On Saturdays, we sold our handmade crafts in the plaza, he with his wooden spoons and I with my colorful woven blankets. The tiendita where I had worked for years eventually closed. Donna Mari said it was time for her to rest at AT first. I panicked. What would I do now? But I wasn't the same woman who once felt lost without direction. I pulled out my little dream notebook and flipped through the pages. And then, there it was, written in my own messy handwriting, open a little store full of color, sweetness, and stories. So I did. I opened a shop in a small corner of the market. It wasn't fancy, just white walls, a squeaky wooden door, and sunlight spilling through the windows. But it was mine. I called it Threads of Life. Because that's what we all are, in the end, threads. Woven together. Sometimes tangled. Sometimes torn, but always capable of being mended. Inside, I sold my crochet pieces, colorful scarves, hand-stitched pillows, tiny woven keychains. I also stocked jars of traditional candies, bundles of herbs, hand-poured candles, and stories. So many stories. People didn't just come to buy things. They came to talk. To cry. To laugh. To remember. Even the neighborhood kids would pop in after school, just to sit by the window and eat tamarind candy while telling me about their day. My mother arrived on opening day with a homemade tres leches cake in her arms and tears in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Hija, she said, hugging me. So proud. And I believed her. Matthias brought an old speaker and played boleros while the neighbors danced between shelves full of yarn and candy. Nothing went perfectly. The sign fell twice, the cake nearly slid off the table, and the cash drawer jammed halfway through the afternoon, but I wouldn't have changed a single moment. That night, after locking the door and turning off the lights, I stood in the middle of my little store, surrounded by everything I had built from the broken pieces of my past, and I whispered to myself, you did it, Gracielita. Every morning after that, I'd open the door of Threads of Life, take a deep breath, and let the scent of yarn, sugar, and possibility fill my lungs. The barrio embraced the shop like it had always been there. Old friends came to visit, new faces came to stay. People didn't just buy things, they stayed. They healed. We healed together. My mother started teaching cooking classes at the community center. I'd stop by sometimes, just to watch her light up while sharing the secrets of mole or how to knead pan de muerto. And I'd smile, because she was no longer the woman who broke me. She was the woman who also picked up a needle and helped me stitch things back together. Matthias? He stayed. Steady, simple, kind. We built a quiet life. Not perfect, but ours. Some nights, we'd sit on the porch of our little home, yes, the one he built for us on a plot of land filled with wildflowers. And we'd watch the stars come out one by one. Do you ever think about everything that had to happen to get us here? I asked him once. He just smiled, squeezed my hand, and said, all the pain was real. But so is this. And he was right, because I learned something I'll carry with me too. My final breath. Happiness isn't something you find. It's something you create, stitch by stitch, moment by moment, with threads of courage, forgiveness, and love. And me? I'm still here, still weaving. Still learning. Still dancing, sometimes offbeat, but always with heart. My name is Gracielita Martinez. And after everything I've lived, I can finally say this, with all the strength in my soul, I became the woman I always needed. And that was more than enough.